They taught you the doctrine. They drilled it into your head until you could recite it in your sleep. Fire discipline, chain of command, rules of engagement. But when the bullets started flying, when your squad was pinned down in a trench ankle-deep in freezing water, when the artillery turned the sky into a wall of fire, the manuals didn't matter anymore. This isn't about what they taught in boot camp. This is about what actually happened when soldiers had to choose between following orders and staying alive. 9 military tactics that were never in any field manual, never officially acknowledged, but saved more lives than any general would ever admit. Because the truth is, war doesn't follow rules, and the soldiers who survived learned that faster than anyone else. Number 9. The Ghost Radio. Every military in the modern era operates on communication protocols. Radio discipline is sacred. You identify yourself with proper call signs. You speak in clear, authorized codes. You maintain radio silence when ordered. The entire command structure depends on knowing who's talking, where they are, and what they're reporting. Break radio discipline, and you compromise the entire operation. The reason for this rigidity is survival at the strategic level. Enemy forces monitor radio transmissions constantly. A single slip, one unauthorized broadcast, and the enemy triangulates your position. Artillery rains down minutes later. Radio discipline wasn't just procedure. It was the invisible shield protecting thousands of soldiers from detection. But in Vietnam, American units discovered something that changed everything. The Viet Cong were already listening. They already knew where you were. The jungle was their home, and they had eyes everywhere. So some forward units started doing something that would have gotten them court-martialed in any other war. They created ghost frequencies. These weren't official channels. They were unauthorized radio nets that existed in the gaps between sanctioned communications. A grunt would accidentally leave his radio on the wrong frequency. Another soldier would respond. They'd relay information about enemy movements, ambush sites, supply caches, all on channels that technically didn't exist in any official log. When command asked about it, soldiers played dumb. Equipment malfunction, atmospheric interference. The radios in the jungle were notoriously unreliable anyway, but the information kept flowing. Units that should have walked into ambushes somehow took different routes. Patrols that should have been wiped out called in artillery strikes on enemy positions they had no official way of knowing about. The risk was enormous. If the enemy figured out these ghost frequencies, they could feed false information directly to American units. No verification, no official channels to cross-reference. A single compromised frequency could lead an entire platoon into a kill zone. And sometimes it did. There are stories, unconfirmed but persistent, of entire squads that vanished after following intelligence from an unauthorized channel. But the alternative was following official protocol while the enemy listened to every word. Sometimes the safest rule is the one you break in secret. Number 8. The reverse retreat. Military doctrine is crystal clear about retreats. When your position is compromised, you fall back in organized stages, covering fire, leapfrogging movements. You withdraw toward your own lines, toward safety, toward reinforcement, never toward the enemy. That's suicide. The logic is unquestionable. Retreating toward your own forces means falling back to prepared positions, to friendly artillery coverage, to reinforcement capabilities. Moving toward the enemy means moving into their strength, into their kill zones, into certain death. Every military academy in the world teaches this. Retreat toward safety. Always. Eastern Front, 1943. Soviet forces are encircled by German units in the frozen hell outside Stalingrad. The Germans expect the Soviets to break toward the east, toward their own lines. They've positioned their strongest units to intercept exactly that movement. Machine gun nests, anti-tank positions, artillery pre-sighted on every logical retreat route heading east. So some Soviet commanders did the unthinkable. They ordered their men to attack west, straight into the German rear positions. It worked because it violated every logical assumption. The German rear guard was minimal. Their heavy weapons faced the wrong direction. Their supply lines were exposed. The Soviets punched through positions that weren't designed to hold against a frontal assault because no one attacks during a retreat. Then they scattered into the wilderness, reformed in small groups, and made their way back to Soviet lines through routes the Germans never thought to cover. Not everyone made it. Some units that tried the reverse retreat were annihilated when they hit unexpected German reserves. Others got disoriented in the chaos and marched straight into minefields. Without proper reconnaissance, you were gambling with hundreds of lives on the assumption that the enemy's rear was softer than their front. But for the units that succeeded, the reverse retreat became a legend whispered in frozen trenches. The impossible escape. The move that shouldn't have worked but did, because sometimes survival means running toward the fire instead of away from it. Number 7. The Phantom Officer. Chain of command is the backbone of military structure. Orders flow down from officers to enlisted men. Every soldier knows their place in the hierarchy. You follow orders from your commanding officer, period. Impersonating an officer is one of the most serious offenses in military law. It's not just against regulations, it's sabotage. This exists because military operations require absolute clarity of command. In combat, there's no time for debate. When an officer gives an order, soldiers must trust that order comes from legitimate authority, backed by strategic intelligence they don't have access to. Fake that authority, and you could send men to their deaths based on nothing but your own guess. But in the chaos of World War I's Western Front, something strange started happening. Junior soldiers, sometimes even privates, would find themselves in sections of trench where every officer was dead. Sniper fire, artillery, gas attacks. The command structure would simply cease to exist in localized sections of the line. So someone would step up. They'd grab an officer's insignia from a corpse, put on the rank, start giving orders. They weren't trying to gain prestige. They were trying to stop the panic. Soldiers without orders become a mob. They freeze, they break, they run. But soldiers with an officer, even a fake one, maintain cohesion. They hold the line. The phantom officers made decisions that saved sections of trench from collapse. They organized fighting withdrawals. They called for reinforcements. They lied to headquarters about their actual rank, knowing that if the truth came out, they'd face a firing squad for impersonating an officer during wartime. And when the real officers finally arrived to retake command, the phantom officers would quietly remove the insignia and slip back into the ranks. Most were never identified. Some were discovered and executed as examples. Others received medals for the actions they took while wearing false rank, without anyone ever knowing those actions came from an unauthorized officer. The question that haunted military tribunals after the war: if a man saves 100 soldiers by pretending to be a lieutenant, is he a hero or a criminal? The manuals say criminal. The survivors would tell you something different. Number 6. The deliberate miss. Rules of engagement define when and how soldiers can fire their weapons. You fire on confirmed enemy combatants. You fire when fired upon. You fire when commanded. Miss your target and you're failing in your duty. Waste ammunition and you're jeopardizing your unit's supply. Accuracy is everything. The reasoning is obvious. Ammunition is finite. In extended campaigns, resupply is uncertain. Every bullet must count. A soldier who can't hit what they're aiming at is a liability, so marksmanship is drilled endlessly. You aim, you fire, you hit. Anything less is incompetence. But in Korea, American soldiers noticed something that the manuals never addressed. When you're holding a defensive position against waves of Chinese infantry, killing efficiency isn't always the goal. Sometimes you need something else entirely. So they started aiming deliberately high, not missing by accident, missing on purpose. A bullet that kills drops one enemy soldier, But a bullet that cracks past someone's head at supersonic speed, close enough to feel the pressure wave, does something different. It breaks the charge. The soldier dives for cover. The man behind him stumbles. The entire wave loses momentum. Fear is a weapon that doesn't require a body count. The deliberate miss became an art form. You'd fire a burst that would scream past the enemy line at ear level. Not random spray. Controlled fear. Just close enough to make them think they barely survived. And in that moment of hesitation, the machine gunner next to you would open up on the actual targets. Command never officially acknowledged this tactic because it directly contradicted ammunition conservation protocols. But the soldiers who practiced it knew something the generals didn't. Sometimes the bullet that doesn't kill is the one that saves your position. The risk was miscalculation. Aim too high and the enemy realizes you're deliberately missing. They stop fearing your fire. Aim too close and you actually hit someone when you didn't mean to, wasting the psychological effect. And if your commanding officer caught you firing without hitting targets, you could face discipline for wasting ammunition in a combat zone. But when the choice is between conserving bullets and breaking an enemy charge before it reaches your trench, you learn to aim for the space between lethality and terror. Number 5. The surrendered weapon. Weapons maintenance is non-negotiable. You clean your rifle. You oil the mechanism. You check the ammunition. Your weapon is your life. Lose it and you face severe punishment. Damage it and you're useless to your unit. Deliberately sabotage military equipment and you're looking at court-martial. This is fundamental. A soldier with a malfunctioning weapon can't defend themselves or their unit. In combat, your rifle is the only thing standing between you and death. Treat it with anything less than absolute care, and you're signing your own death warrant. But during the island-hopping campaigns of the Pacific, American Marines discovered a problem that the armories never prepared them for. The Japanese didn't surrender. They'd fight until they were killed, or they'd fake surrender and detonate grenades when Americans approached to disarm them. Trust a surrendering enemy, and you'd be dead. So some Marines started doing something that would horrify any drill instructor. They'd deliberately throw their weapon away. Not in combat, in the immediate aftermath, when clearing caves and bunkers where Japanese soldiers might be hiding. You'd approach with your rifle ready, but before entering a confined space where an enemy might be waiting, you'd toss your weapon behind you. Walk in unarmed. It seems insane, but the logic was brutal. If a Japanese soldier sees you armed, they know they're dead whether they surrender or fight. So they fight. But if you walk in empty-handed, you create a different calculation. They might hesitate. They might actually surrender because they see a possibility of survival. And if they attack anyway, if they come at you with a knife or bayonet, your squad mates behind you have a clear shot. They're not risking friendly fire. The unarmed man becomes bait, but bait that might save lives by forcing a genuine surrender instead of a fight to the death. Marines who used this tactic didn't advertise it. You couldn't exactly tell your commanding officer you were entering enemy positions without a weapon, but the caves that should have cost 8 lives to clear would only cost 1. And sometimes not even that, because the enemy chose surrender when they saw an American willing to risk death to offer that choice. The failures are unrecorded. The times when walking in unarmed meant walking into a blade. No official reports document how many Marines died trying to create surrender situations by surrendering their own defensive capability first. What would you choose? The certainty of a firefight that kills everyone, or the risk of offering trust to an enemy who might cut you down the moment you're vulnerable? Number 4. The illegal silence. Every military has protocols for reporting contact with the enemy. You encounter hostile forces, you report it immediately. Position, strength, direction of movement. This information gets relayed up the chain of command, compiled into intelligence, used to make strategic decisions. Fail to report enemy contact, and you're sabotaging your own military's operational awareness. The importance is strategic. Command needs accurate intelligence to make informed decisions. If a patrol encounters an enemy unit and doesn't report it, command might send another patrol directly into the same force. Or worse, they might plan operations based on the assumption that an area is clear when it's actually crawling with enemy soldiers. Unreported contact gets people killed. But in Afghanistan, some coalition patrols started encountering a situation that the reporting protocols never accounted for. They'd make contact with Taliban forces in remote villages. Brief firefights. Then, nothing. The Taliban would fade back into the civilian population. No one died, no one was wounded, but technically contact had occurred. So some patrol leaders made a choice. They didn't report it. The reasoning was local. If they reported the contact, command would flag that village as hostile. Air strikes would be authorized. Artillery might be prepositioned. The next patrol through that area would come in expecting a fight, and that expectation would create the fight, even if the original contact was just a handful of Taliban who decided withdrawal was smarter than engagement. By staying silent, the patrol leader kept the village off the target lists, prevented escalation, maintained the fragile neutrality that kept civilians alive, and prevented the area from becoming a permanent combat zone. But the risk was catastrophic. If those Taliban forces used the unreported encounter to set up an ambush for the next patrol, the patrol leader who stayed silent was directly responsible for every casualty. If the Taliban reinforced that position and turned it into a stronghold, the failure to report would haunt every operation in that region. Military law is absolute on this. You report all enemy contact. No exceptions. Soldiers who practiced illegal silence knew that if it ever came to light, they'd face courts-martial for endangering forces through failure to report. Yet some of them believed that creating space for de-escalation, for allowing brief contact to dissolve instead of escalate, saved more lives than following the reporting protocol. They carried that decision in silence, knowing that if they were right, no one would ever know, and if they were wrong, everyone would. Number 3. The friendly fire protocol. Fire discipline is sacred. You identify your target before you shoot. You confirm it's hostile. You absolutely, under no circumstances, fire on friendly forces. Friendly fire is the ultimate failure. It's not just tragic. It's the complete breakdown of military competence. The entire structure of modern warfare depends on this. With the firepower available to modern militaries, a single mistake, one misidentified target, can wipe out an entire squad. Friendly fire incidents are investigated relentlessly. Soldiers who cause them face severe consequences. It's the one line you never cross. But in the urban warfare of Iraq, American units faced a problem that training never prepared them for. Insurgents would deliberately position themselves near American forces, not attacking, just close. Close enough that when they did attack, coalition forces couldn't return effective fire without risking hitting their own troops in the crossfire. So some units developed what they called the friendly fire protocol. It wasn't official. It couldn't be. But when your squad was pinned down with insurgents firing from a position that was danger close to another American unit, someone had to make a call. The protocol was simple. You'd radio the other unit. Tell them you were going to light up a specific grid coordinate. Give them 30 seconds to get away from that position. Then you'd fire everything you had at that grid, regardless of who might still be there. If the other unit cleared in time, you'd suppress or eliminate the insurgent position. If they didn't clear in time, you just committed friendly fire. But staying pinned down meant certain death for your squad. The choice was risk killing friendlies while trying to save your own unit, or die certain following the rules about positive target identification. Units that used this never reported it accurately. After-action reports would describe the engagement differently. Fudge the distances. Adjust the timelines. Make it look like proper fire discipline was maintained. Because admitting you fired on a position that might still have friendly forces meant the end of your military career at minimum. If you've made it this far, you're starting to understand something that military historians rarely discuss. The gap between doctrine and survival isn't a flaw in the system. It's the system. The real question is whether we're honest enough to acknowledge it. Number 2. The executed wounded. The Geneva Conventions are explicit. You provide medical care to wounded combatants. Enemy soldiers who are wounded and unable to fight are protected. You don't execute prisoners. You don't kill the defenseless. This is the line that separates militaries from murder squads. These rules exist because without them, war becomes genocide. The protections for wounded and surrendering soldiers are the bare minimum of human decency that prevents armed conflict from descending into pure slaughter. Every civilized military trains soldiers on these protections. Violate them, and you're a war criminal. But in the Pacific theater of World War II, American forces encountered enemy wounded who couldn't be saved and couldn't be evacuated. Japanese soldiers, sometimes dozens of them, bleeding out in the jungle after a battle. No medical facilities within reach. No possibility of treatment. They'd die within hours in agony, screaming. Some American medics started carrying extra morphine, not for American wounded, for enemy wounded. A massive overdose of morphine is indistinguishable from death by wounds. The soldier simply stops breathing, stops suffering. And on a battlefield where record-keeping is chaos, where bodies are buried in mass graves without individual documentation, one more dead enemy soldier doesn't trigger investigation. Medics who did this knew they were executing wounded prisoners. The morphine wasn't medical care. It was euthanasia. In a military court, there's no distinction. Deliberately killing a wounded, defenseless enemy combatant is murder, regardless of your motivation. But they also knew that leaving a wounded enemy soldier to die slowly, crying for water in a language you don't understand, watching infection spread while they beg for death, was its own kind of murder. The law says you protect the wounded, but the law doesn't tell you what to do when protection is impossible, and the only choice is between slow death and fast death. This wasn't official. It couldn't be. Medics who practiced battlefield euthanasia never discussed it openly. They'd simply report that the enemy wounded had died of their injuries, which was technically true. The morphine just accelerated what was inevitable. The moral weight of this decision destroyed some medics after the war. Others believed they'd shown more mercy than the rules allowed for. But none of them could escape the fact that they'd crossed a line that exists for good reasons, in service of what they believed was a better death. Some lines exist to protect our humanity. But what happens when following those lines means forcing someone to suffer for hours before dying anyway? Number 1. The false casualty report. Casualty reporting is the bedrock of military accountability. When a soldier dies, you report it. Name, rank. Circumstances. The information goes up the chain, gets processed, next of kin are notified. It's not just procedure. It's the sacred promise that if you die in service, your family will know. This system exists because families deserve truth, because militaries must account for every soldier, because the alternative is chaos, mass graves, thousands of families spending decades wondering if their son or daughter or spouse might still be alive somewhere. Accurate casualty reporting is the minimum requirement of honoring the dead. But in Vietnam, some commanders faced an impossible situation. A soldier would go missing in the jungle. No body, no confirmation, just gone, could be captured, could be dead, could have deserted. The honest report would list them as missing in action. And that honest report would destroy a family. Decades of uncertainty, no closure, no death benefits, no ability to move forward, just endless waiting. So some commanders made a decision that could end their careers. They'd file a false casualty report, list the missing soldier as killed in action, fabricate the circumstances, create enough detail that the report would pass review. The family would receive closure. Death benefits would be paid. They could hold a funeral, grieve, and eventually heal. The commander would carry the weight of that lie, knowing that if the soldier was actually alive, if they ever surfaced as a prisoner of war or a deserter, the false casualty report would unravel and expose everything. And if the soldier had actually deserted, if they'd walked away from their post and disappeared into the civilian population, the commander had just given them a clean escape, listed them as a hero instead of a deserter, gave their family honor instead of shame. Some commanders believed this mercy was worth the risk. Others considered it the ultimate betrayal of military accountability. But in the jungle, with no way to know the truth, someone had to make a call. Military law is absolute. False casualty reports are fraud. Filing them is a criminal act. But the commanders who did it believed that a definite lie was kinder than an indefinite truth. The soldiers who were falsely reported dead but were actually alive and imprisoned, who spent years in POW camps while their families mourned and moved on, never got to weigh in on whether that mercy was worth it. These aren't tactics they teach at West Point. They're not in any field manual. Most of them directly violate military law, international conventions, or both. But they happened. In trenches and jungles and deserts, when the gap between what the rules demanded and what survival required became too wide to cross. War doesn't ask for your philosophy. It asks for your decision. Right now, with incomplete information and impossible stakes. And the soldiers who made these choices carried them forever, whether they were right or wrong. We can judge from a distance. We can say they should have followed the rules, trusted the system, maintained discipline. But we'll never know what it feels like to be the person who has to choose, in that moment, between the doctrine that might get you killed and the violation that might save lives. The hidden tactics aren't hidden because they're secret. They're hidden because acknowledging them means acknowledging that sometimes survival and honor point in different directions. And no military in the world wants to admit that the soldiers who kept us safe might have done it by breaking the very rules we sent them to uphold. That weight doesn't go away when the war ends. It just becomes something you carry in silence, like all the other truths that don't fit in after-action reports.